Hi, I'm Toby Gray, the team leader of Team 7, the HTML High Rollers, here to present our project, Real Estate Kings, for Project 3. I was in charge of the homepage, registration, database setup, as well as encryption and decryption for passwords. John was in charge of the login page as well as setting up the cookies, and Eric Howard Graham was in charge of the seller dashboard. Before we start, I would just like to make something very clear. Um, our seller's dashboard is incomplete and non-functional. Uh, we tried to get in touch with Eric. We constantly asked for his input, any sort of collaboration, and he was just entirely absent, ghosting the Discord and not uploading anything really. With that out of the way, let's begin. To start off with, the problem was to create a real estate site where users can register an account and log into that said account, and also edit their respective dashboards with their properties, adding the property listings and the prices and all that. And the requirements for this were for the user to input their registration or login details. And using SQL, this would output a new row in the database with these registration details, which is validated with JavaScript to be proper. And uh, these user row details would be retrieved for login purposes. It would also output the session variables and cookies for the user details, as well as reformatting pages depending on the status of the user being logged in or not. And also, the user had to input their property details, which would then output a new property row in the database, again using SQL, as well as output a new card for their seller dashboard as a listing. JavaScript was used for the validation of registration details to make sure that they were valid in respect of the given format of that field. For example, in your name, you're not allowed to have spaces or numbers because that wouldn't make sense. It was also used to populate the dashboard with all the property cards. PHP was used to handle form input in conjunction with using SQL to add that given input into the user's table in the database, as well as retrieving said information for registration and logging respectively. PHP was also used for storing session variables and cookies, and this was done in order to keep the user signed in between pages, in addition to formatting text and buttons relevant to the user status. So if you were not logged in, you'd be presented details to sign in or sign up. If you were logged in, then you were given access to the dashboard from there, or prompted to log out. Since the company's name was Real Estate Kings, when it came to the UI, we decided to use royal colors, which includes white, gold, and Tyrian purple. And simple designs were used for inputs such as the form in order to make these important details very concise. A small animation was added to the homepage in order to make it more lively, as you can see in the right here where the text up top is somewhat transparent because it's popping into the page. And text elements change depending on your login status. So as you can see, when you're not logged in, you're presented with a box that asks you to sign in or register. But when you are logged in, you're presented your name, as well as the options to go to your dashboard or log out. In addition, at the bottom, there were reviews to make the site more immersive, as it is a live site that's being responded to. And lastly, a sidebar was used for easy navigation in the login page, allowing easy access to both the home and register, in addition to the dashboard if you're logged in.
Here's the diagram for what our project does. You have the user, they visit the website, it will start the session, it will view the homepage. From the homepage, you could go to a couple different pages. You could go to the sign up page where we handle the form, and then it will store that in the database, and then you could destroy that session. Or you could go to the login page, which redirects to the home, sign up, and the dashboard. And I made a logout that destroyed the session. The login page, it will handle the information from the sign up page. It will create a cookie, in this case, email. So I use the email cookie to go through all these pages associated with that session. So the main thing about the login page is once you type in the information from the database, it get validated, and then you log into Seller Dashboard, which Eric made. It lists the email, property, save listing, and messages. And then on the second part of the UML, you have an administrator that analyzes the business. It does things that the user cannot do. It manages the user's roles like seller, buyers, admins. It handles the security, encryption. Toby set up the encryption database, and you can update the project, the website. In our case, the company Real Estate Kings. Here's my front end and back end part. For the front end is basically the user interface and scripts. I styled it. I made a sidebar. Each element in the sidebar had an attribute, a href attribute that specified the destination. So you could go to other pages, or I also made one on-click event. It calls a function show content. So I hide the main content. So once you click the sidebar, it'll display that main content that contains the form fields and form actions. And then on the backend side, you have the PHP files, you have the login validation, which validates and authenticates connected to Toby's SQL. It connects to his Snowball server right here. He stores, I believe, you'll see that on the sign up. He stores stuff like email, user, password. It's in the database. This validates that and connects that. And then I also made a logout script that destroys the session cookie. It'll destroy it and reset everything back to the beginning. Here's the code for that. You'll see my div class side nav. It has a redirection right here. You click on the side nav right here. Like for example, this is the main. This is the sidebar. I call this side nav. It has a home that you can click on. It has login you can click on. It has register you can click on. You click on one of these elements, it'll redirect you to that page. But in my case for login, it has a function called show content. Show content shows the main page should be right here. It shows the main page, which is a blank block. But in that main block, I display the form, the login form is right here. You'll see the email and password that gets submitted. It's getting validated on the server backend right here, the PHP file right here. I also wrote the onClick function right here that alerts. It pops up an alert from the browser that tells you if you forgot your password, you contact them. And of course, you have the session that starts it all. Here's the redirect rules. We picked seller. Our project had a few requirements. We picked to make the seller role and dashboard. I'll keep it simple. Seller gets redirected to the seller dashboard. Any other role, buyer admin, you get sent to the home page. So if the user is a seller, you get sent to sale-.php. Anything else, home.php. Here's the code for that. I'll go through it quick. You got the verifications with the encryption right here. Verify the email, verify the username. You log in. It uses the cookie user email. That cookie will expire after 30 days. It checks the role. If the role associated with that account from the database is a seller, you get sent to the right place, the dashboard. Anything else, buyer, admin, location, back to home. If the password don't match, I display an error message that says invalid email or password. That will pop up if your password don't match or email. But if nothing is provided with the right email, if there's no account associated, it will say user not found. Anything else gets redirected to login. This is Toby's database. This is the connection script. This is the file that Toby wrote, and this is what I wrote to check for errors connected to the database. Here's the concept about sessions. When a user visits or logs in, a session is created by the cause server. There's a unique ID for each session that's generated. It's called the session ID. It's set to the browser. The browser sees this. It's typically stored in a cookie. By default, you get PHP session ID. So every browser default is this cookie right here, which each request to the server, like when you do stuff, you visit pages or you submit or interact with the pages, there's a cookie associated with that request. The server recognizes this. They use that to specify what you're trying to do. They use that, like in this case, I specify my cookie to be email. So anything you do on the login page, there's an email cookie associated with it. It usually expires in 30 days or whatever time frame you set. You could also close the browser to destroy it, or you could use a script to destroy it. In my case, log out. Here's my code for that. Toby wrote the encryption. He gave me tips to for the SQL scripts. I selected from his columns user where email the column there. That's the specification. This is the connection. So you'll see that it expires in 30 days right here. Here's my logout code. I start the session, I reset the array, I destroy the session, then I also destroy the cookie for good measure, then I'll display an alert, and then I delay the alert, so you'll see that.
Here's some pseudocode for the registration process. So when first presented with the sign up, the user is allowed to input their data, including their registration details such as their name and email. And if this data is invalid, then you are prompted with an error and given the opportunity to retry. Otherwise, the form is submitted and you proceed to sign up validation. At sign up validation, the database is searched with these user details, and if these details exist, being the username or the email, an error is returned, and you are prompted to return to sign up to try again. Otherwise, if the data is new and does not already exist, this data is printed for confirmation, and the user is able to confirm this or return to sign up if necessary. On confirm registration, these details are then finally added to the database, and the user is prompted to return to home or log into their new account. This was the code that was used to set up the database, needing only to be ran once and not part of the actual website. The host was set up under the local host, and the username, password, and database name were my credentials. A connection was established using these credentials, and a new table was created using the username, password, first name, last name, email, and role as its columns. as well as an ID that would increment with every new addition. And then, using the query command, this request was submitted and the table was created. Here's the code that was used for JavaScript validation of the form. As you can see, we have function validate, which we create variables using all the form input details, as well as generating an error message to be used and a variable to be used if an error was ever found. So for each one of the form inputs, it would undergo a test, such as the first name being checked for any spaces or numbers, and in any case an error is found. Error found would be set to true because an error existed, and then that specific error would be appended to the error message in order to get a list of all the errors. And of course, the respective span in the HTML would then be populated using document.get by ID inner HTML. And this would repeat for all the input details. And at the bottom, after validation, at the end of validation, if an error was found, then the user would be alerted this error, and the validation returned false, meaning do not allow this to proceed because it's invalid. And here you can see the HTML that was used with all the values and the spans where the error text would be populated. This code was used for the sign-up validation page. So here, as seen before, we have all the details ready for setting up a connection to the database, and the variables email and user are established. And here, under SQL underscore U and E, it tries to find all the rows where the username and email are those variables. So what this does is it returns all the rows into these variables of those respecting values, and then if either of those values are greater than 0, as in there's one or more rows, then that means that username or email already exists, and thus an error message would be appended, and then an error would be set to true. And of course, if there wasn't an error, then the session variables will be set for later use. On the side here, you can see that when an error is found, that error message is then printed as well as the HTML details. And if no error is found, then of course it prints all the inputted information that were put into the session. And at the bottom here, this is just a precaution in case you try to directly enter the site. If post is not submitted, then you are redirected back to the signup. This is the code for the complete registration page. If the session variables are not set, then you are forced to return to the signup, otherwise this proceeds. Once again, the SQL database details are put here and the connection is reestablished, and then new variables are made with the session variables, and a new encrypted variable is created from the encryption of the password. Here, the SQL statement is created where it is adding these variables into the user's table under their respective column values. So user goes into username, encrypted goes into the password, first name, etc. And upon the connection query, this is finally added to the SQL table. And then these session variables are no longer needed and are destroyed in case you wanted to restart the registration process and you can't refresh this page and continuously add the same details. Next, we have just some common functions. Here at the top, we have a function used for encryption. This includes just options such as ciphering, an options value, an encryption IV, an encryption key, which you can change to alter how the encryption turns out by what reference it uses to encrypt. And then a encryption variable is created with the value of OpenSSL encrypt, which is a function for encryption, which takes all these options. And then this encryption value is returned, which is used to encrypt the password. And of course, there's a decrypt function that does the same thing, except it takes an encrypted value and decrypts it. And at the bottom here, this is just a function to reduce redundancy in code where the banner is present in a lot of pages, so you can just call this to print the banner at the top without, filling with HTML. So this is the seller dashboard pseudocode. Once again, I'd like to reiterate that this was Eric's part, and he unfortunately mostly abandoned his part of the project, leaving the seller dashboard very sparse in functionality. So for the seller dashboard, the user is meant to list the details of their property, and then a function is called to print out a card with those details. And what that function does is it essentially just adds a div and then populates it with these details. And as you can see, this is some of the code that was here. The listings are all the property with their details, including the images, the type, all that stuff. And this was done for all the properties that were listed, again as a constant. And then a function here was used to create a listing where it creates a constant card and it is set equal to creating an element, a new div in the page, and of course a uh, class is added to it for CSS purposes and such. And then the inner HTML of that card is modified with the details, and then this uh, this variable is appended to the page. So when it comes to testing, there were a few important aspects to go over. For registration, it would be good to test uh, invalid inputs. Here you can see Toby Gray, but like there's numbers in it as well as a space, which is both invalid. But when you enter Toby Gray, normally it is considered valid and you're allowed to register. For the login, if you entered an email or a password that does not exist in the database, that means you failed to log in. But if the email and password do exist and they match, you're allowed to log in. When it came to roles, if a user had an account that was listed as a seller, when you would go to the dashboard, it would bring you to the seller dashboard. However, if the user was a buyer or admin, when you go to the dashboard, you return home. And normally this would be the buyer admin dashboard, but our group selected to do the seller dashboard. And of course, when setting up these variables or data in the database, these could be easily tracked using the terminal, as you can see, where it lists out the column and all the information. And lastly, before our demo, I just wanted to showcase some of the project dialogue collaboration. As you can see, um, there was very little response from Eric. You can pause if you want to read all this, and here's our GitHub if you want to look at everything that got added in the history. Again, we tried to reach him constantly, but he'd either respond incredibly late or, most of the time not at all. And with that out of the way, let's proceed to the demo. Got a nice little animation here just to make it a little more lively. We're not signed in, so we get the options to sign up or log in. Same with this little dashboard area here. The About Us section if you want to pause to read that. And at the bottom, just for aesthetics, got some reviews that are mostly nice. With that out of the way, let's go into registering. So here we're on the sign up form. This is validated with JavaScript, so that'll prevent us from signing up if we have any bad values. So let's just do some normal stuff, Toby. Then let's mess this one up, Gray. Just do this for the email. For the username, let's make it just my school ID. For the password, let's do something short like pass. And then here we'll set ourselves to seller. So we'll submit that. It'll tell us we got some errors. We got errors in the last name and errors in the password. So what do we got? Up, no numbers or blank spaces allowed. So let's go ahead and boom, get rid of that. If we hit submit, we only have one in the password and the error goes away because we fixed it. So here, no blank spaces allowed, so like no space or tabs or whatever. And the password has to be 8 characters long. This is only 4, so let's just go ahead and call that password. That's 8. And we submit. We're taken here to the review details page. This is all good. But just to be sure, let's retry that. So say we do everything like we did last time. Normally, we'll do this, tier 31, password, seller. If we enter an email that's already used, such as email at test, we're not allowed to register because this email is already used. It detected it in the database. So let's do this again. So again, get to see our details, and let's continue. And then boom, this account is now created. It's in the database. So let's go ahead and log in. We get taken to the login page. Here, we can enter it in. We entered this at email, and the password was password. We log in, and then boom, we're taken to the dashboard. Now, unfortunately, this was Eric's part, so it's not complete. You can see some listings here. Unfortunately, not much in the way of functionality, just appearance. Let's go back to the homepage manually. So here you can see the little dashboard area changed because we're signed in now. So now we're given the option to go to my dashboard or to go back into the login. This is even changed up here. Let's go back into the login page. As you can see, we're logged in, so we got some extra options here. Let's go ahead and click log out. And boom, just like that, we're signed out. Also, just 2 little things on the login page. If we click this button, forgot password, we're just given a little alert telling you if you want to get your password back, go contact an admin. Here's a phone number. It's not real, as well as this email. And if we try to log in with something that clearly does not exist, like that, and there's no way this password's correct, let's Go ahead and try to log in. Of course, this is not in the database, so login fails.